Welcome everyone to the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. I'm your host Michael Pickering. That's right, low-fi's and low fidelity, low quality, in your face, messy as can be global news show. Here we're going to talk about that famous question: what's going on in the world today? We'll be covering 5 headlines from across the globe and then choose one to go into a more detailed analysis. It's Wednesday, meaning it's our weekly Wednesdays feature on Transparency International and corruption around the world. Today, for our third story, we're focusing on the South American country of Suriname. But first, the news fresh off the press. Source: BBC News. World section: Africa. Nigerian man sentenced to death over Zoom. To quickly clarify the headline title for Lo-Fi listeners, recall that the BBC is a British media corporation, and the use of the words over Zoom are used in British English, or what they would simply call English, and have a slight difference in the US. The Nigerian man was sentenced to death in a court hearing that was carried out via Zoom. He was not charged with Zoom-related crime. An important differentiation before we begin. The implications. I choose this story today not to cover the details of the case, but rather to cover the fashion in which the proceedings are taking place. All of us across the globe have had to change our lives of late. Real talk, the only reason you're hearing my voice right now is because of all this going on. But in this particular story, this case, this moment in time, we are seeing something different. The death penalty is a controversial topic no matter where you are in the world. Amnesty International reports that by the end of 2019, 106 countries had legally abolished the death penalty, and when combined with countries that have abandoned it in practice as well, the total comes to 142 countries. For comparative perspective, 142 out of about 200 countries in the world, that's 75% of the world no longer uses the death penalty. Regardless of our views, actually seeing someone, via Zoom, be sentenced to death? This is something different. Media affect everyone in different ways, but a visual medium, a live and online broadcast of someone being sentenced to death, this may take some time to digest and really see how the world, how we feel about the world we live in and the media we use to communicate with. Whoa, now I know that's heavy for a Wednesday, but we're not letting up today, Lo-Fi Nation. We have much to discuss. Next up, source: BBC News again, this time world section Asia. ABS-CBN, Philippines' biggest broadcaster, forced off air. The broadcast company's license to broadcast was set to expire on Monday. Renewing these licenses happens, usually quite easily in most countries, on a regular basis. All broadcast companies have to regularly renew their license across the globe. Just throwing that out there for everyone. Initially, the company was told it could continue broadcasting while waiting for Congress to renew their license. However, on Tuesday, they were ordered to stop broadcasting by the Telecommunications Commission of the government. ABS-CBN has had several conflicts with the country's President Duterte. This story indicates the president is using the licensing process as a way to silence media freedom in the country in a time when transparency across the globe is ever more important, as people are simply trying to survive out there. The implications. Let's put what we've been doing into practice. And let's give you some stats and data on the Philippines, who you may know little about. The Philippines is a group of islands that form a country in between the South China Sea to the west and the Pacific Ocean to the east. North of the islands is Taiwan, south of the islands is Indonesia, and west of the islands is Vietnam. The Philippines has a democratic presidential system of government, when looking from the outside. But let's look further. Their Freedom House score is 59 out of 100, with a partly free ranking in 2020, which has dropped since 2018 when it was a 62 out of 100. So perhaps democratic backsliding as Freedom House measures civil liberties and civil rights in a country. Their 2019 Transparency International Corruption Perception Index was a 34 out of 100, with a ranking of 113 out of 180 countries and territories across the globe, being tied with other countries such as Eswatini, Zambia, El Salvador, Kazakhstan, and Nepal. This indicates a high level of corruption throughout the system, and the countries it shares its rankings with are all well-known states with high levels of corruption. And their Reporters Without Border ranking is 136 out of 180 countries and territories in the world as far as media freedoms, having lost 2 places since last year in 2019, making the country one of the least free media systems in the world. In short, democracy in general is under attack in the Philippines. People commonly say it's hard to know when a country is experiencing democratic decay in real time. No, it's not. You just have to know what to look for. This story is democratic decay. And that's, lo-fi listeners, that is what comparative perspective is all about. And without going into detail about President Duterte, that's a whole nother segment on itself. But moving on, because now it's time for Weekly Wednesday with Transparency International. Last week we left off in South America. Today we pick back up with the country of Suriname. Geography lesson, Lo-Fi Nation. Suriname is bordered by the Atlantic Ocean to the north, French Guiana to the east, Brazil to the south, and Guyana to the west. And in 2018, Suriname had a World Bank recorded GDP per capita of just over $15,000 a year, making it a middle-of-the-way country as far as economic development goes. Just some more comparative perspective for you. And remember, Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index ranks countries and territories between 1 and 180, as well as providing a score of 0 to 100, 0 being very corrupt and 100 being very clean. And Suriname in 2019 comes in at 44 out of 100, making it just over the halfway point toward more corrupt, and ranks number 70 out of 180 countries and territories across the globe. Tied at number 70 with Suriname is Romania, Hungary, and South Africa. Below it, tied at number 74, is Tunisia, Bulgaria, and Jamaica. And above it, tied at 66, is Montenegro, Senegal, Belarus, and Argentina. In many ways, Suriname is a success story from the late decolonization era of the 1900s. Suriname is a former colony of the Netherlands, and was one of the last Latin American countries to gain independence and become an independent country in 1975. Since then, the political and economic situation has improved, as shown by being a democratic country, as well as having a good level of economic development. Well done, Suriname! Though their Corruption Perception Index score of 44 out of 100 is troubling, and further demonstrates that all countries, all democracies, still have much work to do to truly represent the people. Because remember, lo-fi listeners, democracy, Demokratis, is ruled by the people. As we move through more and more countries across the globe, we'll begin to see just how much of a special case Suriname really is, as most former colonies that became independent countries have had quite a different experience with success. And now for our headline in the Spotlight segment. Source, Reuters World News. Special report. U.S. rearms to nullify China's missile supremacy. That's right, folks. Now that the U.S. has pulled out of the arms treaty with Russia from the Cold War era, the U.S. is going to increase its missiles capabilities, with its eye on the Asian Pacific and beefing up military might there. At this moment, it's believed that China's long-range missiles outdo those of the U.S. Now the U.S. government aims to change that. The background and implications of this story. We've brought you several stories these past few weeks about China spreading its influence in the South China Sea and disputes of borders with several other countries. We've also talked about the China-U.S. trade war. And the news of late, which we haven't talked about as much, is criticism of China from the U.S. administration on the handling of the current global conditions. This criticism has also increased as of late. The addition of this story adds to that list, making watchers of these developments ponder, where exactly is all of this going? To paraphrase China's response, check yourself, U.S. Check yourself. Again, not official words from the Chinese government, simply a lo-fi interpretation. A question to students of Lofi Poli Sci. Where exactly do you think all of this is going? Should we take this in the context of this being a presidential election year in the U.S.? If so, what are the implications from that? Write in and let me know your thoughts. And a last piece of news from AP News International. China plans to complete space station by 2022. That's right, Lo-Fi Nation, let's take this race to space and see what happens. China just launched another spacecraft this week to help in the development of their own independent space station. Currently, countries across the globe, including Russia, participate and send astronauts to the International Space Station. However, due to the U.S. citing security concerns, China is not allowed to participate in the program. Wait, did we say Russia can play but China cannot, due to security concerns? Interesting. Moving on. The implications. Last week we reported that the U.S. has plans to land astronauts back on the moon by 2024 for the first time in what would be 52 years. The space race is heating up out there, Lo-Fi listeners. The arms race may be taking off again. And doesn't this all sound a little too familiar from an era that's bygone? To answer that, I leave it to you this time, Lo-Fi Nation. You let me know what you think. Remember though, space, is not the final frontier. We still know diddly, and yes, I said diddly, we still know diddly squat about our own oceans in comparison to what is there, still waiting for us, in that deep, beautiful sea. And that's a brief snapshot of what's going on in the world today. Please write in with your questions, comments, or concerns to Lofi Poli Sci at planetmail.com. That's Lofi, Lofi, Poli, Poli, Sci, SCI at planetmail.com. Let me say thank you so much for listening. Stay safe, wash those hands, and I'll see you on the next episode of the Lofi Poli Sci podcast. Pickering, signing off.